There's a strange moment every gardener eventually reaches, and if you're watching this, you've probably felt it too. It happens when you toss kitchen scraps into a bin or pit and suddenly realize how much potential is being wasted. Those peels, coffee grounds, wilted greens, cardboard bits and paper towels aren't trash. They're fuel. They're nutrient currency. Throughout history, the people who understood how to direct that currency, monks in medieval abbeys, farmers during wartime shortages, homesteaders in frontier settlements, always outperformed those who didn't. And today, with the way soil is degrading worldwide and the cost of fertilizers creeping upward every year, that old knowledge matters more than ever. What I'm about to share isn't another rundown of basic vermicomposting. It's the worm casting hack that takes kitchen scraps and turns them into a continuous flow of black gold without bins, without sifting, and without the typical headaches. This system runs quietly in the background like a living engine. Once you start it, it keeps feeding your garden indefinitely. The method begins with understanding worms as soil processors rather than compost residents. A lot of people make the mistake of treating worms as if they are little machines trapped in a box. They feed them, worry about moisture, fret over temperature, and constantly check on them like nervous caretakers. But if you study historical agriculture and how ancient farmers maintained fertility without modern tools, you discover something crucial. They didn't manage worms, they created conditions where worms managed themselves. The Romans used layered organic pits. Germanic farmers buried food waste beneath deep mulch. Even in the East African highlands, traditional farmers used shallow, shaded trenches lined with fibrous plant matter to maintain living, worm-rich soil all year round. The lesson is always the same, really. Worms thrive when the environment does the work. The hack follows this same principle. Instead of confining worms, you set up a slow-feeding trench or bed, something no deeper than your forearm, and fill it with a simple combination of shredded paper or cardboard, chopped kitchen scraps, and a surface layer of carbon-rich mulch. The worms migrate into it on their own if your garden already has a population. If not, introducing red wigglers just once is enough. The bed becomes a constant supply point, where the worms come and go freely, dropping castings right where you need them. The system works because the scraps break down at the same rate worms process them. This is where the hack becomes powerful. Traditional bins fail because they force all scraps into one confined space where moisture swings wildly, anaerobic pockets form, and temperature fluctuates too quickly. But when you build the trench outside in real soil, the earth moderates everything. Excess moisture drains naturally. Temperature is buffered. Predators or pests rarely build up because your scraps are below the surface rather than in an exposed pile. The worms move in gradually, and instead of a tidal wave of decomposition, you end up with a slow, steady supply. Every handful of scraps you bury becomes microbe-rich material. The paper and cardboard act like long-term worm bedding that stays moist, holds structure, and keeps oxygen moving through the trench. Worm castings accumulate around the feeding zone, but because the worms are not trapped, they carry those castings outward into the surrounding soil. The result is a black gold production line that doesn't need to be harvested. The garden harvests it for you. The easiest way to apply this hack is to turn a garden bed into a living worm corridor. One of the most practical examples is setting up a trench right through the centre of a raised bed. You dig a narrow path along the middle, fill it with layers of torn paper, leaves, small scraps, and a bit of soil. Then you cover the surface with mulch so sunlight never dries it out. Plant crops on both sides and continue feeding the trench once a week with whatever kitchen scraps you have. Over the next few months, you'll notice the soil near the trench becoming darker, softer, and more sponge-like. Another step-by-step application is the border trench method. You simply line the inside of any garden bed with a shallow channel that you keep fed throughout the growing season. The worms use that border like a highway, and because worm castings contain natural plant hormones and beneficial microbes, your plants grow more vigorously without you adding fertilizer. You can even use this approach in a small backyard setting by designating just one corner as a feeding station. Over time, the worms multiply and spread out through the entire yard, improving soil structure everywhere they travel. The long-term benefits multiply because worm castings behave differently from compost. Compost improves soil, yes, but worm castings rebuild it. Castings hold water at far higher levels than standard organic matter, which means the soil becomes drought-resistant. They also contain forms of nitrogen that do not burn plants, even at high concentrations, so roots feed steadily without stress. And most importantly, castings are loaded with bacteria and fungi that kickstart nutrient cycling. So what this really means is that your soil becomes, well, a living system. You know, one that's actually geared towards supporting plants instead of just acting like inert dirt that needs constant external additions. The regenerative part, well, it comes from the fact that as worms feed, they leave behind new tunnels, oxygen pockets, moisture channels, and microbe deposits. These all add up into a structure that, quite remarkably, actively improves itself. Your job, then, simply becomes maintaining the feeding trench, not, managing the whole system. If you build this correctly and keep feeding it consistently, the soil becomes richer every season. And honestly, if you're a history enthusiast or a survival-minded grower, you know that any method that generates fertility without outside inputs is, well, worth its weight in gold. If you found this guide useful, do consider subscribing to Botanical Bliss and share this video with someone who's ready to break free from complicated composting systems. Your support truly helps keep these deep-dive, historically grounded gardening methods alive.